A lot of people who enter spirituality develop big issues with setting boundaries correctly. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to set healthy boundaries for your spiritual body. I'm going to take you through how boundaries work differently in the ego and in the spiritual. And I'm going to show you how to transition through the gray area, which is after the ego no longer needs protecting and we drop the boundaries. How do we reinstall them in the right place in our lives to take care of us from other things like energy vampires, which I've spoken about in another video. And if you missed that video and you don't want to miss another upload, I take spirituality, break it down and make it practical and applicable so that you can use it to start manifesting your dream life. So if that's interesting, make sure to hit the subscribe button, turn your notifications on, and you won't miss another upload like this. So when we start entering a spiritual path, through a spiritual awakening or just pure interest in the topic, we start to lose a lot of the things that we were trying to protect with egoic boundaries before. Now, boundaries aren't useless, and we've got to use them in the right way once we shift into spirituality. And that gray area can be very hard to navigate because as a spiritual being, we know that things are meant to be a reflection. We're meant to allow the lessons in. And how can you do that with boundaries, you might think? Am I not just blocking off something that's meant for my path? Am I not just stopping myself from experiencing more pain, which I know equals growth? You might have a million questions. And if there's something specific, like a really specific question, leave it in the comments below and I'll take you through your exact example myself. For those of you who don't know, I respond to every single comment on all of my videos. You can go take a look. So that gray area is something we do have to navigate through. Where do the boundaries even sit? How do we differentiate the things that we need to protect ourselves from, which I'm going to go into more depth about because it's not just being protective. It's not that you're under threat is actually what I want to highlight. So all of that is coming in this video today. So let's start out with the ego boundaries that we have had, that we might still have, or that linger in a lot of our spaces today. That boundary kind of looks like this. It's a boundary to the outside world. So I've drawn it like that to represent how it's other people we're trying to protect ourselves from. It's circumstance. It's in the natural world that we set boundaries. And the reason we do that is to protect things that are important to the ego. Things like your image, your identity, your insecurities and fears, things like that define your ego. We don't want those things interrupted when we're living in that egoic mindset. So we set these boundaries up, and we might do that with a wall of aggression. We might do it with a wall of retreat or emotional disconnect. That's how we set these boundaries up. So someone might come in and notice or say something about the very thing that we are extremely insecure about. Maybe it's weight. And they're like, hey, when did you last go to the gym? And that is a very invasive thing to the ego. How dare you come and attack what I've worked so hard to hide? And we might respond then with anger. Well, look at you. It's not like you have a face of an angel, and we turn it into this whole back and forth. Or we might just completely emotionally disconnect and pull back and freeze. And if you go into fawn or freeze and you get stuck and you just almost don't deal with it, but it just burns a hole through your comfort and the things that you're experiencing, that is another form of a boundary that's been crossed. And we don't necessarily know how to refine those boundaries so that they are healthy in a different way. Because we don't actually want those boundaries. We don't want to have boundaries in the natural world. Those things should come at us. Those arrows should fly. And when they do hit, we should be able to take it and turn it into something more powerful. And that's where we're eventually going to get into in this video. If you're enjoying this so far and this is making sense, hit the thumbs up button. I want to see how many of you have been there. How many of you have sat there in your egoic boundaries and had them crossed and have it affect you? So that's how the ego boundaries work. It's kind of like a protective barrier for all the things that the ego is defined by. Now, the ego is meant to be broken down in our experience of life. We're meant to try and understand how it gets affected, and when it does, it's actually doing the shadow work for us. So these types of things being impacted, we should be grateful for. We should allow those things into our space. We should invite those sort of things in. It will show us where we have a lack of peace. It will show us where our ego is hiding in the shadows, because it will hurt. You will feel something and you will have a reaction. And the things that you're having a reaction to are the ego being taken out. But that pain allows for this to come true. That pain allows for your peace, your progress, your passion, your freedom to start existing. So we have to set a different type of boundary so that these things can start to flourish and the rest of the things can be taken away. We actually replace them. The gray area is the transition phase. So if you've gotten into spirituality recently, maybe 10 years ago, it doesn't really matter when, but if you've come to an understanding that these types of things we actually need to let go of so that we can have these things, then you're in the right mindset to understand the gray area that we need to transition out of. And I don't think a lot of spiritual people necessarily do this. So this is something you want to actually apply to level up again. Now, the gray area is that point where we realize the difference between spirituality and ego. And it's very highly contrasted. By that I mean it's complete polar opposites. So spirituality is meant to be inviting. It's meant to be accepting. So we do want to be open to the ego getting dropped off and not being a problem anymore. But the gray area basically is a space in which you go, well, where do I set boundaries? If I'm meant to accept everything that comes my way and I'm meant to be uncomfortable and hurt, then what are boundaries even used for? And they're used for a very important thing, and I'm going to take you into that in a little bit. So this gray area is that uncertainty. It's where you start asking these questions. Well, how am I going to be okay with all of this constant nonsense coming at me and still maintain the things that I'm meant to maintain if boundaries are going to stop them from coming? We got to shift our understanding of boundaries, and this is where we start to get into the spiritual and how to actually protect these things that we should be valuing. So the boundary looks a bit different. You can see I've put it right in the middle, so it's across the neck. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean go get a necklace or tattoo a line here. It's not about that. This boundary is to represent the difference between the mind and the heart. The boundary is to protect the heart, which is the authentic self. It's the spiritual placement in the body as opposed to the head. Now, you can take this more figuratively. It's not about the literal heart and the literal head. But we have two thinkers in us. We have an emotionally connected thinker, which is related to love and peace and all of these things over here. And then we have the mind, which is the ego. And this mind thinker is to do with this. And it's not necessarily governed by emotions. And if there were an emotion to say what it would be governed by, it would be fear. So we want to pull out of getting stuck in the fear boundaries and protecting things that we're scared of happening and be free to those potential things that we are scared of, and at the same time be boundaried between our mind and our heart. So how do we live in that heart and have a healthy boundary? We have to realize and establish the difference between thoughts and emotions. And then when we further go into emotions, we want to understand the difference between emotional reaction and emotional action. So one has a choice that we actually choose to have an emotional reaction, and the other one happens automatically. So a good way to tell if your boundaries are set properly is if something happens, someone says something offensive, and you have an automatic emotional reaction to what they've said, like being offended, then you know there's not a boundary set there, and that's a message from the universe telling you where your ego is growing back. It's a lesson. It's the next level. It's trying to show you what you can do to progress your spiritual experience here on earth. So we're grateful for the egoic infringements of boundaries, and then we take care of not allowing it to change our state of self for the worse. We should always be in this state of power. We should be experiencing this and not having an emotional reaction that we do not choose. And that will then lead into a physical reaction. For example, if someone says something, you have an emotional reaction and then you start smacking them. Whatever your physical, earthly reaction is, it's a consequence of an unintentional emotion. If we are conscious, all of the decisions that make a shift in any way, shape or form, so emotional, natural, will be a choice. And that's what we have to aim to do. So if we actually protect being conscious, if the thing that the boundary takes care of is staying in awareness, presence, and consciousness, then we know we've set the boundaries in the right place. That's the thing boundaries are meant to protect. So for those of you spiritual people sitting in that gray area, not certain about where to put the boundaries, or should you have them, shouldn't you have them? Of course you should, but it should be between what happens in the head and what you want to authentically feel. So if you can stay conscious through an interaction where your ego boundaries are sort of being infringed, that is where you're going to be okay. If you can stay conscious and stay present, then the real you is not being affected. And here are some ways to set up these boundaries so that you know they're in the correct space and that you have the power to choose how you react emotionally and physically. As soon as something happens that you feel that your boundaries are being taken advantage of, for example, let's say that you are a good, energetic person and you want to share goodness to people. So you set this healthy boundary of being good and sharing good, loving energy, and someone doesn't appreciate it, and you feel a sense of offense. You allow yourself to feel that and process it within you, and you can process it with these tools. Everything that happens to you has a purpose. It's all got greater meaning. It's to serve something bigger than you. It will help you. It will show you where the ego is, because that's the part being hurt, and the lesson that comes with it. So like I said, back to that scenario of someone offending you and you not feeling appreciated. What this is telling you is you are placing your worth on the outside again, not in the joy of giving that good message or doing something nice for someone. That should bear its own reward. So if you're sitting in a healthy boundary position, you will do something for someone out of that authentic good place without expectation of anything in return. And when you know it's set right, you don't have problems with people. You don't have issues with how people react to things, because everything you're doing is an authentic demonstration of what you actually want to be. And it will be these things. So that's step one. Step two is to not take things personally. If the things that are happening around you make you feel a certain way, you have that automatic emotional reaction. You're taking it personally. You will feel as if it's a personal attack on who you are. That means that you're valuing the identity of the ego. So you're valuing preserving the identity around you. If you're taking it personally, you're hyperinflating your earthly life. We are one consciousness. And in that space that you feel that you're taking things personally, realize that this is you talking to yourself in a mirror. That whoever's offending you or whatever's going on is an interaction with yourself in the mirror. They are a reflection of how you are treating yourself. So that's why, back to that appreciation example, if someone's not showing you appreciation, you're not showing yourself appreciation. And that leads me to point number 3, which is don't only treat others the way you want to be treated. Treat yourself the way you want others to treat you. When we start treating ourselves in a way that we want others to treat us, so we start viewing ourselves as valuable, we start appreciating ourselves, we take care of ourselves, we won't tolerate being in a position where other people don't do that too. Because that would be not taking care of yourself. You will be in a position then where people take advantage. That means you're taking advantage of yourself in some way, shape, or form. Treat every boundary infringement in the ego's perspective as a lesson of where your good energy is seeping out unintentionally, where people are getting something for free from you without you getting to be your authentic, true, and fulfilled self. Every part of it is a lesson. And when we can accept and embrace that, then we can move into the stage of not having automatic reactions, processing the lesson within, and that will reinstill that conscious awareness, presence, and peace. And that's what the boundary is meant to create. So don't get stuck in your head. Get into that space of love and fulfillment that you can access through imagination. No one has ever given you the rule that the feelings in imagination are off limits. You can pull them into your space right now and say, I choose to feel what I'm imagining regardless of it. And let me prove it to you. Fear in the mind gives the same chemical reaction as an actual threat that we fear. So I use this example often, but if a lion is actually coming to grab you, or you think of being fired, your body goes through the same chemical process. So the imagination can create an emotional experience. You cannot imagine something without feeling what it would feel like to have that scenario. So you can onboard feeling. Feel whatever you want to feel. Govern that. Take care of that feeling. And that's with the boundaries. Not getting stuck in your head. Not reacting when your ego boundaries are crossed. And moving up on the spiritual level. You will raise your frequency with this boundary setting technique. I'd love to hear from you guys what you thought of this. Did this sound cool? Does this sound like something you can get on board with? I'd love to chat to you all in the comments and hopefully see your names pop up on my subscriber list. Thanks so much for watching to this point. I hope to catch you on my next video on Tuesday. Mad love and light.